Welcome to the latest installment of the AST Journal Club Series. Today's session is on the article, Using ChatGPT for Kidney Transplantation, Perceived Information Quality by Race and Education Levels. This session is sponsored by the AST Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access to Life Committee, and supported by the AST Transplant Administration and Quality Management and Kidney Pancreas Communities of Practice as part of the AI and Transplantation webinar series. In a moment, I'll turn our session over to our moderators, Dr. Dorry Segev from the NYU Grossman School of Medicine and Dr. Irene Kim from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. But before we begin the main presentation, we do have a few housekeeping notes to help you engage with today's webinar. There is currently a viewership polling question displayed for the audience. Please take a moment to answer this question while we finish the remaining announcements. We encourage you to use chat during the Journal Club to share your thoughts and comments. However, if you have a question to submit to our panelists, we recommend using the Q&A button in Zoom webinar. Questions submitted via the chat window may be missed during the presentation. This Journal Club is being recorded, and the archive will be available on the MyAST website and the AST YouTube channel in 2 to 3 business days. Finally, when you log off at the conclusion of today's Journal Club, you will see a link to a short evaluation survey to complete. Please fill out this survey to help us keep our content current and engaging. I will now turn our session over to our moderators, Dr. Segev and Kim, to begin our presentation.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining this webinar. I'm Irene Kim. I'm a liver and kidney transplant surgeon and the director of the Comprehensive Transplant Center at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. I'm also a member of the IDEAL AST committee. And I'm going to turn it over to Dorry now, who will introduce himself and our speaker.
Howdy to everyone. I say howdy because our speaker is in Texas. I'm Dorry Segev. I'm a transplant surgeon in New York. I guess I do some work in AI, which is probably why I was invited to help moderate today. Our speaker today is Stefan Hahn. Stefan is a transplant nephrologist at the University of Texas at Austin, having trained in Oklahoma and at UCSF. Stefan tells us that his goal in advancing understanding in transplantation is to help keep our allografts lasting longer, which I think is a very virtuous goal. Stefan has failed to find uses of AI to help raise his newborn child, and has just spent the first week as his first week taking care of a child without the in-laws in town. And so we will see if Stefan can rise to the challenge of giving a presentation without all of those distractions. We're very much looking forward to this presentation of a recent study that Stefan and his team have done that I do talk about when I give overviews of AI and transplantation. And I won't ruin it by telling you anything other than it's really important and very interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing an enthralling talk. So take it away, Stefan.
Thank you for the introduction. Like Dorry said, I have a little baby, so if you hear a baby crying, it's because of that. My wife's all over it, and as soon as I'm done with this, we're gonna trade places. So, but thank you so much for the intro. First, I wanna thank the moderators, Dorry and Irene, for agreeing to moderate today, and also want to thank the IDEAL committee for arranging everything for this talk as well. So we'll just get rolling. So this is the conflict of interest disclosure. I have nothing to disclose. This is Irene's conflict of interest disclosure, which are unrelated to AI or content of this talk. And this is the conflict of interest disclosure for Dorry, which is also unrelated to AI or content of this talk. So, goal for this talk, we're first going to talk about why we should study artificial intelligence in kidney transplantation briefly. This is a journal club, so we'll talk about our paper. And then, I want to, use this paper as like a jump starter for a conversation regarding diversity, inclusion, equity of AI use in kidney transplantation as well at the end of this talk. So this is our paper, published in Clinical Transplantation last year. So the paper is titled "Using ChatGPT for Kidney Transplantation: Perceived Information Quality by Race, Education Level." So let's start by saying why it is so important to study AI in kidney transplantation. So AI will likely play an increasingly central role in kidney transplantation. So AI can leverage vast amount of data beyond human ability. So it has a lot of potential to improve patient outcomes, optimize resources, and even enhance decision making. There's some potential specific uses and potential use of AI in transplantation. Now, first thing I want to talk about is it could potentially optimize organ allocation. It's very important to get the right kidney to the right patient, right? So AI can optimize this to maybe speed this up, maybe hopefully reducing cold ischemic times and warm ischemic times. Also, it could monitor post-transplant prognosis. An example of this will be the iBox, which is an AI-based scoring data from it uses data from EGFR, proteinuria, histological scoring, DAC profile to predict the risk of long-term kidney transplant loss. iBox is also being looked at as a surrogate endpoint for clinical trials as well. So it has also potential of like speeding up these trials to get the newer therapies out there faster, hopefully. It could also provide support for kidney transplant team. I referenced one of Dorry's paper actually, where his group asked ChatGPT some clinical kidney transplant related question, and they compared the ChatGPT's response, the answers to the nephrology fellows and trained program directors, and depending on the level, the version of ChatGPT they looked at, right? Basically, they noted that ChatGPT was doing comparatively well to the fellows basically already. Not quite at the level of the trained fellowship directors, but it's only gonna get better. So maybe it'll catch up eventually. So that shows the possibility of using ChatGPT in complex cases to support the transplant team as well. And I bolded this last one. You could, AI can provide information to the patient. That I bolded this because this is the area that our paper looked at. So why we wanted to do this study? First, the previous studies have overlooked the it didn't look at most of the studies I already talked about just now. They kind of looked at what we thought about. We as in like the professionals thought about how the AI was in kidney transplantation, how accurate we thought it was, how empathetic we thought it was. It really didn't look at the other side of the equation, what the patients thought or patient's family thought. So we wanted to look at that in more detail. It's very important to remind ourselves that kidney transplantation is a very complex process for the non-professionals, right? It requires extensive preparation prior to transplantation, and it needs ongoing monitoring post-transplant. It could be very overwhelming. So, it also involves a diverse group of stakeholders as well. Arguably, the biggest stakeholder on all this are the patients, but we have to remember that we have to think about the patients' families, potential donors, policymakers, all of whom can benefit from readily available high-quality information. We also wanted to look at this because there's existing concerns over disparities in kidney transplantation. So previous research suggested that underserved populations tend to harbor distrust in healthcare systems, and non-white and low socioeconomic status are negatively associated with referrals, evaluation, wait lists of kidney transplant. And we want to see the potential benefit of AI. We want to make sure that the potential AI is seen by everyone. These were our research questions, which were that first is how do generative AI tools such as ChatGPT provide health information in kidney transplantation setting? How do people perceive the quality of health information provided by generative AI? And are there any racial or socioeconomic differences in perception of health information provided by generative AI? I'm just gonna give a brief overview of ChatGPT. So it is a AI-based chatbot or a large language model, which uses AI to process and generate natural language text. So how it works is it is trained on the vast data from the internet. So when we give it a prompt, it generates text and it predicts the next most likely words. Just hearing that concept, you would think that it should not work very well. However, it works very well. So it's rapidly improving and being used more and more widely. Okay, example I want to give everyone. Just a few years ago, right? I would if somebody didn't know something, people would say, "Hey, I'm gonna Google that," right? Let me Google that. Nowadays, I'm hearing more and more people tell me if they didn't know something, they would say, "Hey, let me ask ChatGPT that." So it's growing in popularity. More and more people's gonna use it. So we saw a lot of potential of this tool being used to answer questions regarding kidney transplantation for our patients and the family members and other stakeholders on this. So method we used. So we wanted to find potential kidney transplantation questions a person may ask ChatGPT in a more comprehensive way. So we collected available Reddit posts regarding kidney transplant. Reddit is a popular social media forum. So we used a Reddit API and crawled over 4,000 Reddit posts using Python, which is a coding language that were potentially related to kidney transplant from following subreddits. This is an example of one of the posts we found through our crawling. So this is an example of like a pre-transplant patient asking a question, which says, "Hi, if anyone here has already received a kidney transplant, especially if you are in your late 60s or older when you first get it, what is your quality of life after transplant compared to before? Is it good as you'd hoped it to be? What aspect have you surprised you?" And this is from a subreddit under dialysis. This is another example. This is an example of like a post-transplant question that we found, which says, "I had my kidney transplant 10 years ago, and I feel like I was doing fine for a long time, but now things are slowly going down. I have around 35 function left, so not too bad. The one thing I notice most is my energy level. I just can't do all the things I want to. P.S. It's not age, I hope, because I'm only 30 years old." And this was a post that was found under the subreddit kidney disease. This is the last one. I won't spend too much time on this. This is the last one. So this is like an example of like a family member / potential donor asking a question. So the post says, "Hi there. I'm hoping to donate a kidney to my mom before she has to go on dialysis. Just curious about getting through the blood testing. How hard is it to get a green light, and about how strict they are about BMI. I'm currently at 31, activity, diet, and trying to lose weight. I'm terrified that my inability to lose weight will impact me being able to donate." And this was from a subreddit under kidney donor. So after collecting all these posts, we did some data quality check to ensure the post was directly related to kidney transplantation. This was probably the most manual portion of our study, where kidney transplant professionals went through the 4,000 plus posts manually to make sure it was related to kidney transplant. Some were removed due to being like an ad. They were trying to sell a product, so we removed them. But a lot of them were removed because they weren't quite related to kidney transplant. Example I could think of is we found a lot of posts asking about blood donation, for example. So I think the word donation is the reason that it was picked up originally, but not quite kidney transplant questions, so we ruled them out. So we ended up with 239 questions, but we randomly selected 100 of them and to allow us to maintain a dataset diversity while optimizing the research efficiency. This is an example of the transcript we obtained. So for all out of the 100 posts we collected, we asked ChatGPT those posts, and these are example transcript. Okay, so this transcript says the Reddit user asked, "I'm currently on dialysis and am on transplant list. I was wondering if I would be kicked off the list if I use marijuana or edibles? Do they only care about THC being detected in my system, or is CBD not allowed either? And ChatGPT gave this very complete answer, in my opinion. So it started out by saying that it's not a medical professional, but can provide only general information. And then it goes into really good detail about what THC is and potential concerns of the transplant team regarding THC. Then it explains what CBD is, and then the difference between CBD and THC, and ends the answer by saying that each situation may be different, and to get more information, they need to contact their center, because there's also very center dependent rules, right, for more details. So I mean, overall, great answer. Most of us probably don't have time to go into such details when someone asks me this in my clinic, for example. So when I was reviewing all these answers, I was very impressed on the quality of the answers that ChatGPT gave. We use ChatGPT 3.5. The reason for that is the time of this study, 3.5 was the latest version. There are newer versions out there now, but this was our study. For each question, we restarted a ChatGPT session. The reason for that is we did not want previous answers to be incorporated on the following questions that were asked. So basically, we made 100 of these kind of transcripts. We ended up with 86 transcripts. The reason is some of them we removed because they had potential information, like personal information about a Reddit user. So we didn't want to distribute that. Also, some of the posts kind of named specific centers. We also didn't want to distribute that either. So 31 of them were clinical questions. These are questions that I would be answering to my patients basically daily in my clinics, right? So those are typical questions. 27 emotional support posts. This was kind of a surprise to me, just because there were so many emotional support posts. In retrospect, it makes sense because Reddit is, like I say, it's a social media platform, right? Not everyone who posts on Reddit is looking for specific answers per se. What I noticed was a lot of Reddit users are posting their frustration, their unfortunate situation or whatever. They're just kind of venting pretty much to like the internet, basically. So I was just kind of surprised how many there were of this. There's also 11 questions regarding post-transplant quality of life, some questions regarding eligibility and waitlist time, and some questions regarding access and insurance concerns as well. So we conducted a survey to assess how people perceive and evaluate the health advice given by ChatGPT. We used an online panel from Prolifica and initially got 600 surveyors. All 600 surveyors were from the US and proficient in English. And we ended up using 565 surveyors due to these are the ones that pass the attention checks. So attention checks are questions that are made to make sure that surveyors actually read the transcripts. So surveyors were required to stay on the transcript for 30 seconds. They couldn't move forward for 30 seconds. And then they were asked the question we wanted. But one of the questions we would ask, like, what was the transcript you just read about, right? The right answer will be kidney transplant, right? And there will be other random other answers they could pick. But if they don't pick kidney transplant, we assume that they didn't read the transcript very well, or they didn't read it all. So that's why we removed them and ended up with 565. This is a demographic information of our participants. Main thing I want to highlight in this demographic is the fact that 88.5%, so majority of our surveyor never had any kidney problems. So the finding we're going to share is more of a perspective of the general public and not the patients per se. And then, like I said, the patients are arguably the biggest stakeholders. So it's in our wish list. Maybe we could focus on that in the future and get different studies going. So each survey participants received 5 transcripts, which were randomly selected. So 5 out of 86, basically, of the transcript we created. So after reading each transcript, they rated quality of information given by ChatGPT's response by answering how accurate they thought the posts were, how believable they thought the posts were, useful, authentic, and informative. We also try to look at the empathy, perceived empathy of this by asking them how empathetic the ChatGPT response were by using. We asked survey how they thought about the ChatGPT's how they thought they understood the Reddit user and how well organized the situations, how recognize the situations as well. So perceived information quality was measured in 7-point scale, where higher numbers suggested higher quality of information. For perceived empathy, we use a 5-point scale, higher numbers suggesting more empathetic the surveyor thought the posts were. These indicators were used from a previous publications regarding health communication. To address the nested data structure, nested data structure meaning that multiple measures from each participant, right? Because each participant read 5 surveys. So we used multi-level analysis to investigate potential differences in how individuals from various race, ethnic background, and education level perceive the ChatGPT's response to a question regarding the kidney transplantation. Control variable for our study, we use prior kidney disease history, age, gender, income, technology readiness. We asked them about like interest in using ChatGPT within a year and interest in using ChatGPT for health. So this table shows the full results of our multi-level analysis. It's kind of hard to read on this slide, so I apologize for that. But if anyone wants to dive in deeper, it's in our supplemental section of our publication. But I don't want to go into too details because I want to focus on the significant findings, right? So interaction between race, ethnicity, and education level related to perceived information quality. So we noted significant interaction emerged consistently across the information quality measures. I do want to note that the rating for the informativeness was the only one that was like marginally significant. And no significant interaction was observed in the perceived empathy. This is a visualized chart showing the racial, ethnic, and educational differences in how people perceive the quality. The blue line represents the white individuals, and the red line represents the non-white individuals. So our findings show that for non-white individuals, greater level of education, which means our education cutoff was high school education level or less, or some college education or more. So that was our cutoff. So greater level of education are associated with more favorable evaluation of health information quality provided by ChatGPT. Notably, a contrast pattern is observed among white individuals, where higher level of education are linked with a decrease in perceived information quality. I do want to point out that our study do need to be examined in some context of several limitations. Okay, first thing is the possible reasons why race, ethnicity, and education level may influence how individuals perceive the quality of information provided by ChatGPT is it wasn't clear from our study. Like our study wasn't looking for the answers for that, unfortunately. So hopefully there'll be other ways in the future to see why this was the case. Also, I want to note that we use a web-based panel. So majority of the surveyors that we got did not have any kidney disease. The biggest stakeholders, like I said, are the patients. So focusing on the patients in the future studies may show a different finding as well, which is in one of our wish lists to do. Also, I want to note that we use ChatGPT 3.5. They are newer version of ChatGPT already, which is supposed to have better reasoning of capabilities and more accurate results. So the results may have been different if we use the newer version. Also, I want to point out that there are other AI-based chatbot that's available. The popular ones are, for example, like Google's Gemini, Meta's Llama, and all the news is about this DeepSeek's R1 as well, which is also available. So, and then there are more out there as well. So which, each one of them may also show different responses as well. So in summary, race, ethnicity, and education levels may influence how individuals perceive the quality of information provided by ChatGPT. So simply providing information may not guarantee increased benefit for all users. So we need to consider the diverse needs and attitudes of users to ensure that the potential benefit of AI-powered health information are fairly realized across different populations. So, before I finish, I wanted to kind of jumpstart a conversation, hopefully, about diversity, inclusion, and equity of AI in transplantation. So there are some concern of AI contributing to further disparities, right? There may be some imbalances in training data and lack of contextual awareness. So how these chatbots are trained is they use available data in the internet, right? So if we think there are biases already incorporated in the available data, the current model is only gonna spit out and reinforce the biases that already exist. There are concerns of that. Also, the unequal access to technology is a concern as well. To be able to access these technologies, you have to have a smartphone or a laptop or a computer, and hopefully a stable, good internet. And not everyone have that, unfortunately. There are possible ways to develop AI tools that me and my collaborators thought about, and I'm sure there's other ways too, but these are some thoughts that we had, was that when they develop these AI tools, maybe they could be more attuned to the communication style of different population. Maybe incorporation of diverse data set in development is pretty much very important. Increased transparency in development is maybe also very important. There are open source generative AIs out there. I think Llama is a good example of that, and most daily users may not care about being open source or not. However, maybe the computer scientists probably care more about that, and probably their trust may trickle down to the daily users as well. So potentially being more transparent may help with this. Also, maybe expanding user personalization options may help it as well. Now, this is a very interesting time to talk about AI and diversity, inclusion, and equity. The reason is AI is gaining a lot of attention, right? It's all over the news. It's gaining popularity. It's gaining a lot of funding. Versus diversity, inclusion, and equity, a lot of negative attention is going on currently. It's losing funding. I don't want to be too political here, but pushback against DEI arise from the concerns that job opportunities may be awarded based on factors other than merit. We are not doing that here, right? We are just trying to aim to ensure that everyone benefit from the potential benefit of AI in kidney transplantation, and no one's left behind. That's everything I have. But before I finish, I want to thank my collaborators who worked on this paper with me. They definitely deserve more credit than me for getting this paper out there. And then I also want to briefly thank the University of Texas's Center for Health Communication for providing the funding, which led to starting this project. Thank you so much for your attention.
Stefan, thank you so much for presenting your paper. I'm trying to think of the takeaways for me as someone who does not regularly use ChatGPT or these various forums. And, I perceive it as generational for me, but as Dorry and I were discussing before the webinar started, that that might not be true. I'm pretty late to the game. I guess one takeaway is that our patients are using these platforms, whether we like it or not. They're using them to inform their decisions or their emotions or feelings regarding transplantation. So as a clinician, my first question to you is, how do we talk about this with our patients? To me, this is not any different from a patient telling me that they're using Dr. Google to ask certain questions, or even social media. I feel like we've seen this before with prior iterations of information availability. So it doesn't particularly bother me as a clinician that patients are using this, but how would you first suggest starting that conversation with our patients, and whether we should encourage or discourage ChatGPT's use?
Sure. I think for like as like a first pass, it's not bad at all right now. The problem that we may face is ChatGPT doesn't know the patient as much as we would know the patient, right? They don't know all the context. So I would kind of caution them when they ask ChatGPT certain clinical questions that it might not factor in stuff that we may know. Yeah, right. Just same for when they Google stuff, right? And ask the internet stuff. They don't know the full picture, and not ChatGPT is not 100%, right? For example, when we did the transcripts, most of the answers were great, but I do remember seeing a couple that were kind of false. An example I could give you is a user asked ChatGPT about native kidney nephrectomies, like how if they would take out their old kidneys when they get a new kidney, right? And as we know, they don't do that very often, right? But ChatGPT answered in a way that it was done more commonly than not, which I didn't agree with. But for the most part, ChatGPT is great, but they're not 100%. So we need to be cautious because of that.
Great. I will echo Irene's comments that we very much enjoyed your presentation and your study, and it's very important. I will take a question from the audience in the Q&A. So for those of you on the line who want to ask questions, better for you to put the question in the Q&A than the chat, although we will do our best to monitor both. The first question that came up was, would you recommend Google users to shift 100% to ChatGPT? Would there be any downside to making that jump?
I'm gonna steal Dr. Dorry's answer that we kind of discussed before this session was starting. So basically, ChatGPT will make up an answer if they don't know it, versus Google, if they search something that you might not find the right answer because it'll just give you links to your website. So that's that. But overall, asking ChatGPT something and Google something, I think you're gonna probably end up at a same result, but ChatGPT will give you the faster results probably.
Yeah, I think one thing I like to tell people is that the more pedestrian the search is for the information, the better ChatGPT will do. So if you say, can you name me one person who grew up in Texas who won a Grammy this year? ChatGPT will be able to very easily name that for you, whereas a Google search might require a tremendous amount of poking around to get to there. You've probably had this as well, Stefan, where you ask ChatGPT something and it gives you an answer and you literally write back, that doesn't seem right. And then ChatGPT comes back to you and says, oh, you know what? You're right. That's totally wrong. I made that up. This is the real answer to it. And then sometimes that answer also doesn't seem quite right to you. So there is still issues with what they call hallucinations. As you said, you used 3.5 here. We know that newer versions of ChatGPT are more accurate, have fewer hallucinations, have fewer of these problems. Also, newer large language models are giving us responses with citations. And, like you can get a link to whatever it was that inspired that chatbot to give you the response. And then sometimes you go to the link and the whole thing doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah,
but
there's a lot of fake links I noticed, unfortunately.
yeah, exactly. Or a link to something that actually doesn't say the thing that ChatGPT said. I know that when our group looked at you mentioned the study that Michael Mankowski did looking at ChatGPT's responses to ASN kidney transplant questions. And as the versions improved, the responses improved quite dramatically, right? So 3.5 was like 40% correct answers. 4V, which was only less than a year later, was like 85% correct answers. And so I think we're seeing an improvement in these chat boxes, these chatbots as well. And you know, I would agree with you that people should these days probably be at least equally using Google search as they are using AI, large language model based searches, so that they can get a sense of the things that these chatbots are saying, because inevitably, as Irene was saying, our patients are using it. They're gonna use it. There's no question that they're gonna use it. And so the question is, how do we offer them guidance in the context of that? Irene, do you want to take on the next question?
Sure. Next question from the Q&A. Thank you for this presentation and info sharing. Any guess or knowledge about the variations of ChatGPT versus Google's Gemini AI for information quality related to kidney transplant?
I haven't seen too many studies on Gemini when it comes to kidney transplant. So, I mean, like I said, hopefully it's in my wish list in the future to look at the other chatbots as well. So hopefully we'll have some more information in the future that I know of. I don't know if Dorry has more thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Stephen. I've not seen much evaluating Gemini in the context of medicine. I will say, for general purposes, there are more and more large language models being developed that are medicine specific. And one thing that I would like to see is ones that are transplant specific. And that the technology for that actually exists, right? Because you build this sort of baseline transformer architecture for a large language model that can interact with you, that's trained on the entire internet. But then you can take that large language model and also train it on all of PubMed, or also train it on a bunch of medical information to make a large language model that's more accurate in the medical space. And I think that we're seeing more and more of that being developed. So my guess is within a year, there will be AI specific, you know, like medicine specific AI chatbots that we can be using.
Like a PubMed chat.
Yeah,
GPT or
there's a
something.
MedGPT actually that's already available. We tried to use that in our study too briefly, but it was very annoying just because, like I said, every time you ask the question, you have to refresh, right? So it forgets the old answer. Thing about MedGPT, the version we were using, every time you try to refresh, it would go to the regular ChatGPT. So it was a lot of clicking that was involved. So we're like, okay, this is not worth doing right now. So hopefully in the near future, we could look at that a little closer as well.
There's another
a new thing is because I never asked for it. It just started popping up on my Google searches, but it seems to be pretty good. It kind of gets away from what, Dorry, you were saying about all the unnecessary links and websites that I don't really care for. Stephen, do you have any idea of how long that's been around for?
The citations that Dorry was talking about, or
Oh, the Gemini AI on Google searching.
Oh, that's a new thing. Yeah, it's probably, yeah. So I mean, it was under the name Bard initially, and then they started out with the incorporating the Google search. I believe you can opt out of it if you want, but that they renamed the Bard to Gemini, and it's been there for at least a year or so, I believe. But I believe you could opt out if you don't want it, just because it's like an experiment. They do say it's like experimental. It's not fully developed yet and stuff like that. It's in beta basically.
We could ask AI how long Gemini has been giving answers. In fact, let's see.
Google searches.
Hey, Google, how long has Gemini been giving answers on Google searches? Gemini started giving answers on Google search in May 2024. So there's our answer. There's a question in the Q&A. Do you use public or private tenants? How have you considered suggesting that practitioners use a private tenant for their use cases? That's a good, we talked about this a little bit as well.
Yeah. Just because, like, if we use the public one, they could technically use it under training for the next version. So we don't want to give away private information in the public ChatGPT if at all possible. I don't have any access to like a HIPAA compliant ChatGPT, but I know they're out there.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would caution everyone when using a large language model for your academic or hospital-based work, make sure you are familiar with your institution's policies on what they allow you to use public LLMs for and what they are requiring that you keep off of the public LLMs. So for example, if you feed in your latest NIH grant into ChatGPT 4V, then ChatGPT 5 will probably have some training that incorporates your latest grant, and your institution might be upset about that because that's your institution's intellectual property. And way worse if you start feeding in HIPAA-related things or patient-related questions, et cetera. So every institution, to my knowledge, now has some sort of AI policy, and be very familiar with your institution's AI policy. And if you're doing anything related to patient care or the academic work that's in your institution, make sure that it is consistent with your institution's policies.
I know there's like a lawsuit going out with Times where I think they're suing ChatGPT, well, the company that owns ChatGPT, because they didn't allow, they trained their ChatGPT model on a lot of their papers, obviously, and they didn't allow, didn't want that, obviously, and so there's a lot of money going around, lawsuits going on, so we need to be very careful for sure.
For you guys who are obviously ChatGPT experts, when you see a letter that discloses that they've used ChatGPT or a paper, does that influence your respect of the authors or the information provided? Does that influence?
I've seen more and more disclosures that says like they didn't use ChatGPT to write this paper and stuff like that. But if they say it, I don't know. Just because, like I said, it's being more used and more. I think if you don't use it, you may just be behind. So I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know what Dorry thinks about that.
Yeah, so different journals have different policies for what's allowed in terms of ChatGPT, or just let's just say LLM use in general. I can tell you that when somebody sends me something that they have copied right out of a large language model, I can tell that it comes out of a large language model. In the same way that we can look at a paragraph and say, this is somebody who's 1 year into learning the English language, we can look at a paragraph and say, this is a large language model that is 1 year into learning the English language. There are ways that those things speak that are quite different from the ways that we normally speak in scientific discourse. So I think that people need to be very, very careful with what they do with large language models, particularly in the setting of academia. Some people say, oh, I just feed it the 20 papers that I looked at and I say, give me an introductory paragraph, and it does a pretty good job of that. And I would say, well, if that helps you then write a good introduction, fine, but you're going to have to write your own introduction because it does not understand the context of the things that it's saying. It's just playing with words using math. And for those listening who have not watched the AST series on AI, we have some introductory webinars where we talk about how neural nets work, how large language models work. And remember, it's just math. And so they don't think in the same way that we think. And so we need to be really careful with that. That said, I will go to one of the questions in the Q&A that I think is a really good question, which is, how will you recommend this tool is used for non-English speakers, patients, et cetera? And I'll let Stefan start, and I think we'll have a good conversation about an area where there is particularly potential benefit to these things.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't used it, but when I was, like especially in a clinical setting, but I hope in the future it'll be available. But I introduced ChatGPT to my in-laws when they were around. They left last week, but when they were around, I introduced them to that, and we used it as like a translator. it's amazing how good it is as a translator. So if there's like a HIPAA compliant one out there where you could talk, instead of like calling a interpreter and waiting for them for 5 minutes and stuff like that, take out your phone, hopefully it's HIPAA client, being able to use it as a translator that's really fast, accurate, I think it has a lot of potential there. And also for like non-English speaking patients, right? They could ask questions in their native language and still get an answer. And then they could maybe translate that in English and show us and what their questions are and stuff like that. And what they found is also gonna have a lot of potential as well to be more comprehensive.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we're particularly weak in this area when we're talking and explaining to patients in the clinical setting about their conditions and treatments and whatever. As you know, if there's a language barrier, and I could really see how you have a tablet, you call up ChatGPT and say, okay, explain this liver transplant in, whatever language. And as a clinician, then you now have a visual interface with the patient. So I think that there's a lot of potential here.
and I think some of this is back to the comment I made about the more pedestrian, the more functional these things are going to be, right? Like ChatGPT has read the entire internet's worth of literature and poetry in Korean, and the entire literature's, the entire internet's worth of literature and poetry in French, et cetera. And so its ability to communicate in these languages rests on what has been trained in it, and it has really good training in these languages and in the conversational use of these languages, right? Because it reads Reddit in the same way that it reads Shakespeare. And so I think that people feel very comfortable communicating with these large language models because the large language models actually do a very good job of communicating conversationally and also do a very good job of expressing empathy. And one of the things I was going to ask you about was, sort of how you saw the balance, particularly when you read over some of the ChatGPT responses, of the accuracy of the information versus the empathy of what was given to the patient. Because one of my understandings and personal experience, but also sort of scientific understanding, is that large language models do a really good job of empathy because there's a lot of empathy being written about in the internet that has trained these things.
Yeah, so I should put a shout out to one of the papers that was cited in our paper that was published a couple of years ago at JAMA Internal Medicine, where they basically compared Reddit posts that were, we kind of got the idea of using Reddit posts because of that paper. They used Reddit posts that were for, it was a subreddit where actual doctors answer Reddit users' question basically. And they got those questions and asked the ChatGPT, and they compared the doctor's answers with ChatGPT's answers. And it was reviewed by the professional like us, like kidney transplant team. So it may be different if like a patient may have looked at it. But anyways, the doctors and the professionals thought that ChatGPT gave more empathetic answers than the doctors did. So I think another part of it is because they just give more complete answers than we do, just because we don't have time. Like, I have to see the next patient, right? We don't have time to be able to talk to the patients as long as we want, unfortunately.
Next question. What, if any, are the ethical implications of clinicians input patients' clinical data into a LLM, both the US but also China models? And does your answer differ for these? So I think this is more about HIPAA compliance, this question, rather than an academic research perspective.
Yeah, I mean, like Dorry already mentioned, we want to be very careful putting in patient information in these, just because it could potentially be leaked, like spread out there during the next version that comes out, right? So I would be very careful and don't put any HIPAA information in these publicly available large language models, and see if your institution has like a HIPAA compliant version that you could use instead.
Yeah, I would say that don't put anything into ChatGPT that you wouldn't feel comfortable posting publicly on social media. And be very familiar with your institution's policies, because some institutions are even more restrictive than that, and you don't want to find yourself in trouble for that. Here's an interesting one. Do you have any knowledge if the information provided by ChatGPT regarding kidney transplant varies based on language?
Our study only looked at English, so I really can't answer that accurately from the information I have. But I mean, from the uses my in-laws use, like asking in Korean and about like stuff that, because they were interested in what kidney transplant is and stuff like that, right? So they were asking in Korean, and it was pretty accurate there. But that's a very limited data set over there on that. So it's hard to answer that for sure.
Yeah, I have no idea. Dorry, have you had any patient perception?
Yeah, I've not heard of anything, but it's my understanding, kind of based on the architecture of these models, that it should respond in any language that it's communicating with you based on the knowledge that it has that's language independent. Because basically, language gets kind of filtered out, and then you have this whole middle part of the neural net that's all kind of knowledge based, and then language gets added back in for the response part of the architecture. So I think that I would be surprised if it would give less accurate answers in a language where there was less information on the internet using that language. Now, its ability to speak comfortably in a language obviously is going to rely on the amount of information, that it can use to learn that language based on whatever it's trained on. But I think the knowledge is in a form in the neural net that is not language dependent.
Interesting. So it's not, for the Korean example, it's not relying on Korean literature to inform the response. It's drawing upon all papers and translating it for the user, potentially.
I mean, again, remember, it doesn't think, it's all math, but yes, the way the architecture works, that should be, and you can try this. You can ask it the same question and remember to reset between each iteration, like Stefan was saying, but ask it the same question in English and in a different language, and then take that answer and translate that answer and see how close the two responses are.
That would be interesting. Is there any option to only provide answers supported by evidence-based sources? So can you select that in ChatGPT?
Not on the general ChatGPT, but like Dorry said, they're gonna be medicine-focused one that may do that in the future. But general GPT just uses everything from the internet. I don't think it could, as far as I could tell, that it can't just focus on the evidence-based stuff yet.
Is there a medical ChatGPT in existence right now?
Yeah, MedGPT is available currently, but they do comment that it's under development and shouldn't be used in clinical settings and stuff like that, as a reminder for everyone. It's not complete.
Let's see. How about a disclosure policy regarding LLM use? Research have to disclose conflict of interest, maybe researchers, et cetera, created using such tools could indicate that fact. That's a good question, but I would say that most journals now have a AI policy and guidance on when you need to disclose the use of AI. As Stefan has said, most of the disclosures we see are, I didn't use AI, which is fine too. But I think that journals have policies and institutions have policies as well. And so you need to be familiar with both of those, the institution where you work and the journal where you're submitting your paper to.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be more and more standard. If the journal don't have it now, they'll probably have it soon.
Right.
Have you investigated using private LLMs to do post-visit note summarization? And how about pre-visit patient history summary so that the provider can see a concise information past medical history before they walk in? I've never done this before.
I mean, that would be interesting. I mean, I think institutions probably could have their own LLMs somewhat easily, assuming they have the hardware to do so. Especially because there are these open source LLMs out there that you could take and basically make it all your own if you want. If you have the person who is able to do that. I'm not a computer scientist, so I personally don't have anything like that. But I heard there are versions out there that could do that on.
Yeah, so I know that in some Epic systems, there has been a trial rollout of a pre-visit patient history. When you see somebody in clinic, they give you a summary. Again, back to the more pedestrian. So, a medical student could do that for you, which means that an LLM will probably do a pretty decent job of doing that for you. In our institution, we are now putting together a trial where in the middle of the night when you get an organ offer, you have an LLM to help you sift through the patients that are on your waiting list, summarize their clinical features for you, help you find patients with certain clinical features that you're targeting for, sort of open offers and things like that. So that's an area we're working on in transplantation. I know also there are trials now of clinic tools where you see a patient in clinic and you have a conversation with them in clinic, just like you normally would. And as they leave, your Epic note is filled out for you to review with all the information based on the AI system overhearing the clinic visit that you just had. And so I think what we will get better at doing, and maybe this is a reasonable take-home message for those sort of interested in how AI will integrate with us, what we're going to get better at doing is we're going to get better at prompting AI, right? So Stefan, you've probably, as you've, sort of learned to work with ChatGPT, you've probably gotten better at asking it questions in a way
precise, the better. Yes.
Yeah, that you're going to get a decent response. And I think that these tools, so for example, I'm going to get better at saying what I say in clinic so that the patient understands it, and then the AI transcription system also understands it, so it can go accurately into my clinic note, and then I don't have to edit my clinic note as much. And we're going to learn to prompt these things. In fact, there's an entire new field called prompt engineering. Like, people are going to go to school and get degrees in prompt engineering so that they learn how to prompt an AI that draws pictures so that they can actually use that in their marketing career or something like that. So I think that how to interface with these and prompt these tools will be sort of the next step for us that we will inevitably need to learn, in the same way that you learned how to do Google searches 10, 20 years ago. And you're going to learn how to talk to large language models moving forward that are medical or not medical. And I'm looking at the time, and I think we're just about done. So I will thank you again, Stefan, and thank my co-moderator, Irene. And Irene, do you want to usher us out?
Sure thing. Thanks everyone for joining again. And whether or not you're a novice ChatGPT user like myself or a veteran like Stefan and Dorry, I hope you take away something from this webinar. I found it extremely fascinating personally, and thanks again.
AST would like to thank Drs. Han, Segev, and Kim, the AST Ideal Committee, and all of our attendees for today's session. Please remember to complete the evaluation survey in Zoom and visit myast.org/education to view our video archives and register for upcoming journal clubs. Thank you all again for today's great session.